Good evening, everyone. I am Lisha Dore, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to One on One, where we bring to you some of the best minds in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, tonight, our focus is on business and the economy, and we are very honored to have with us this evening a well-known businessman and chairman of the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers. No stranger to our platform, although I was saying to him earlier, it feels like a long time since we've had him on, Mr. Vivek Charran. Now, when Vivek is here, we don't need to say much because he says it all. But I would still like to point out three key developments where business and economy is concerned. Now, firstly, the country is preparing for the 2026 mid-year budget review, which will be presented in the Parliament on June 15th by Finance Minister, the Honorable Devendranath Thakur. And we have heard that the minister is expected to seek approval for an additional 2.93 billion in expenditure. Much of that will go towards funding public sector wage increases, and that will cover more than 62,000 unionized workers. So that is something maybe we will discuss tonight. I don't know if Vivek or my co-moderator, Dr. Rogers, would want to weigh in on that as well as yourselves, members of the audience. But, we would like to maybe discuss what this will mean for government finances, economic growth, and the everyday lives of our citizens. Now, the second thing I want to mention in what many people are describing as a major vote of confidence in Trinidad and Tobago is that the World Bank Group has announced plans to establish a permanent presence in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that is absolutely fantastic. Great news. Now, our government has said that this could unlock somewhere between US 1 billion and US 5 billion in financing, investment opportunities, and also technical support for both the public and the private sector. So perhaps we will touch on that as well. Could this be a game changer for infrastructure, for business development, for diversification? That's a very, very hot topic, diversification. And the final thing I would like to mention is the latest IMF report. And that was very, very encouraging. It offered some encouraging signs for the economy, and it noted things that, like inflation has returned to low levels, the banking sector remains stable, foreign reserves are healthy, and the country's current account remains in surplus. The report also projected economic growth that would be supported by new energy products and expanding non-energy sectors. So guys, I want to say, this is just my opening remarks, but all good news for the economy and the business sector. We have Mr. Charran here who will weigh in. He's very hands-on. He's a known businessman. And also, as I said before, Mr. Charran, he is the chairman of the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers. Right? I want to welcome you, the viewers, who are joining us tonight on Zoom. I'm seeing a few people coming in on Zoom and social media. We are live on YouTube and Facebook. Those of you who are tuning in, please share the live. This is going to be a very, very interesting program tonight. Members of the media who will be tuning in, we are absolutely thrilled to have you. As I say, every week we want to make this program interactive. That is what differentiates us from the other programs. So please, if you want to ask a question, make a contribution, feel free to raise your hand and, of course, use the chats. So without further ado, I would now like to pass the mic over to my co-moderator, Dr. Donnie Rogers, who will give his opening remarks and kick off our conversation tonight.
Good night, Lisha. Good night to our guests and good night to all our viewers and listeners. Thank you for being with us once again. I think my position tonight, taking in consideration the recent IMF report, could be summed up in one word: stability. And I think that is important, and it's an important um, building block as to how we could go forward and the manner in which we could go forward. If you don't have a stable foundation, nothing is going to happen. Now, all these reports and all these indicators and the findings of the reports must be taken in the context of where we were before. And I will give an example just based on the agricultural sector, which was very depressed. So in the opening comments, I don't want to go too much in detail. We'll get into that discussion, but I would like to open by saying that my position on where we are at, it starts at stability. Over to you, Lisha.
Vivek, are you in a position to join us? I'm seeing your camera is off.
No, no, I'm here. I'm here.
All right, so we want to get straight into our discussion with you tonight. I mean, we spoke about a couple things in the opening remarks, the media budget review, World Bank coming to Trinidad and Tobago, and the very, very reassuring IMF report. So just passing it over to you now, you're very hands-on. As I said, you're in touch with the ground, you're in touch with the business community. The topic we're here to discuss is developments in the business sector as well as the economy. So I invite you now to share your remarks with us.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thanks a lot, Lisha and Donnie. I'm happy to be on again. Yes, I am in touch with the ground, in particularly with the SMEs, and I have to start off by saying that it's still very challenging for the SMEs. It's still very challenging for us all. Do we have confidence that things will get better? Yes. Why we have that confidence is because we're hearing a lot of new information coming out rapidly, I think, and almost on a weekly basis of changes and developments that are happening in the energy sector. Why the energy sector is important to us one of the first major reasons that's going to affect as many people as it could. And I see that's an important thing. When we're talking about growth and we're talking about developments in the economy, we really want, what I would like to see is that it reaches as far as it can and trickle down as far as it can in the economy. Because I have to go back to, let's say, last 10 years, particularly last 5. And I have to say that what I saw, or what you can analyze, what happened over the last 5 years in particular, was there was kind of a redistribution of wealth and assets in the economy. That redistribution really happened, as a result of a lot of the COVID policies. Many businesses, many service businesses as well, to any service sector, from spas and restaurants and so on, were closed for, I would say, almost 3 years. And when you look at that, there was no direct aid like what happened in many other countries. There was no stimulus after like what happened in many other countries. So basically, people did not earn income for 3 years, and that put them in a considerable amount of debt. While that was happening, on the other side of that was that people were making a massive amount of income, because they were the only retail, they were the only people who were operating in an economy the size of 1.4 million. And 1.4 million people weren't exactly locked down. 1.4 million people could still come out at certain times within a curfew, and they could still buy as they needed to because they were at home as well. And that would be all the people and all the businesses that were prioritized or said that they were able to operate during that time, namely manufacturing, namely distribution, and most of all supermarkets, pharmacies, and so on. And when you look at movements in the economy, despite the fact that the actual commercial activity in the economy seems to be muted, and I'm saying that is muted from the perspective of the testimonies that I've heard of the majority of SMEs across Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly in the Confederation, that business is still slow. So that's what I mean, muted. But even within the fact that commercial activity is slow, we see a lot of things happening, particularly in East-West Corridor. We see malls going up, malls building. We see people expanding. We see, despite the fact that we're saying that we really need to cut the food import bill, we're seeing food distribution also expanding. So when we see, and we've seen a lot of retail stores opening, and when it is that normal businesses, when I say normal businesses, the normal SMEs, family businesses that have been around for a very long time, looking at this and they can't get US dollars themselves, then it really comes down to two issues in that department. One is not just the supply of US dollars, but who has the cash flow to buy the US dollars from the bank that exists there already. And if your sales are slow, then you're not really going to have the cash flow, considering that from COVID until now, you have really been taking on one debt to the other, whether it is the moratorium that some people may have just finished paying off, depending on at what stage of the loan they took it at, because COVID was only, what, 6 or 7 years that, that had happened. And then we're looking at the fact that some people as well too would have been mortgaging in order to meet the current demands of their businesses and so on. So when we look at that, this rapid, I would say, redistribution of wealth and assets that happened, put other business sectors in the economy, I would say particularly retail and the SME sector, in not a great position. Then the government changed, and the government changed particularly, I believe, because everybody felt that there was a great need for it to happen. We certainly didn't see, I'm talking about the SMEs, we certainly didn't see a future with the policies of the then government. And so, that change we thought was necessary for survival, and that change we thought was the best thing that could happen for the economy. Despite that, many people are complaining and many people are saying, well, look, a lot of things, a lot of things haven't changed. I don't think anybody expected the scale of mismanagement is one word, but also you have to look at the scale of how bad things are when the government came in and suddenly realized that the previous government was running ministries on a month-to-month basis because of funding, that the treasury was basically empty, that there were no grants to give anybody, nothing to really stimulate the economy to a large degree, given the government's huge recurrent expenditure, as it is now, and what is said to increase, right? So when we look at these things, coupled with how bad the crime situation had grown to at that point in time, there was a lot on the plate to deal with, and that can't be easy. So in any conversation, while it's easy to talk about what affects you, we also have to understand that the government is there with us in the same situation, and that this situation is not of our making, it's not of the business sector making when it comes to SME, and the present government didn't make it either. But I think that they're trying the best that they can do. Now, there are a lot of mixed signals coming out of the economy. One of the good things, like I said, is the confidence and the hope that it's from 2028, late 2027, 2028, things are going to change, and that the government is working feverishly, to address all the, address the rebuilding of the energy sector, as it were. We're seeing many multinational companies coming in and pledging to invest. We're trying to work on diplomatic relations with Venezuela. A lot of negativity. There's a lot of negativity about that I don't understand. I would think that the best thing to do would be for everybody to get on board and with the government and want better relations between Trinidad and Venezuela. I think Venezuela is in a better place now than it was before. Certainly when you look at the current leader of Venezuela, she would not be the leader of Venezuela were it not for what happened with the American government and Venezuela. Trinidad assisted that in a way that wasn't always popular. But at the end of the day, when you look at the significant changes that have happened in Venezuela, particularly with the changes made with, in the oil and gas sector as well too, opening it up as it were. I think that was a step in the right direction. And do remember that none of this would have happened if it wasn't for the intervention that occurred. Now, in the midst of all this, Trinidad is trying to, build towards a settlement and negotiation with Venezuela with regard to what their role is going to be. And I think that, will work out in our favor. I don't see how it could not work out in our favor, given this new Venezuela. And given the fact that this new Venezuela wants to keep positive ties with the United States and wants to keep positive ties because they're going to be a force and an economy to reckon with in the Caribbean and this area. I would say, certainly within the next 10 years. So there is that. Until then, what are we dealing with? Until then, we are still dealing with very low credit card limits on credit cards, which is affecting everybody, particularly travel, particularly people doing very basic and simple things, particularly people who have corporate credit cards and we're using that to buy goods. We're also dealing with the fact that the supply of US dollars is still muted. It's still short. It's not reaching where it is now. I do know for a fact that the central bank governor has reprioritized or suggested to the bank to reprioritize business as one of the sectors that should get US dollars. That being said, the priority list that existed since COVID is still in existence, which is manufacturers, pharmaceuticals, medicines, that sort of thing, and a couple other things that were added on to them. Toiletry items like soap and so on. So they still are ahead of, let's say, retail, basic retail or ordinary retail that isn't in food distribution and so on, in terms of the who gets the US dollars. So one of the things that was unexpected though, and why I'm talking about mixed signals is the fact that you mentioned the IMF report as being somewhat buoyant. You mentioned the fact that, and I mentioned the fact about a positive outlook, as it were, with regard to our energy sector. Certainly certainly in the short term, with new gas fields scheduled to be monetized 2027, 2028, and that money is going to start coming in, things are definitely going to change. I have many friends who are economists. Dr. Roger Hussein is one of them, many of the others. Everybody seems to agree that this is going to happen. The question is, when it does happen, as I said, how far down is it going to trickle down to? So what is the current situation with SMEs? The current situation with SMEs is not good, I would say. Despite the fact that we are looking, we're looking for better things happen in the future, the fact is that we still have to survive from now until then. And in the current environment where the government is hard pressed with their own expenses and are unable to really, provide the grants and so on that could assist, the current landscape, which was also developed over the last 10 years, is not, I would say, the best landscape for SMEs to thrive in. What we really want, what the economists say we need to do, what the government says we need to do, what everyone has always been saying we need to do is we need to diversify. Why do we need to diversify? We need to diversify for two key reasons. One is to save US dollars. But then to save US dollars, what we really want to do is we want to have more startups. We want to have more import substitution across many sectors. And we want to try to export at least regionally. And to do that, when I look, what we need changes to be made on a policy level. And we need a crucible or crash, as it were, to be made to kind of assist startups. Now, so I've attended Ministry of Trade, the recent symposium they had at Hyatt and so on about that 1 year later diversification, talking about exports increasing, and what they have down the pipeline. And all these things are good things. But what all these things are taking into account are current exports and the expectation that current exports are going to grow. And the fact that they're working with manufacturers and so on who already are in the sector to increase their exports. and to provide opportunities along those lines for the exports as well too. What we are talking about at the Confederation of Regional Chambers, Business Chambers, what we're also talking about with PSOT, Private Sector Organization of Trinidad and Tobago, is that we don't think that is enough. For the change to be meaningful enough, that we can enter into some level of prosperity and get out of the debt that we are, that we need to also diversify. And this diversification, as it were, should be broad. But what this diversification means is that new people need to get into the sector. We're not talking about growing the people already in the sector. While that is important, what is equally or even more important is new entrants into the sector, which means that we're talking about a lot of new startups. And one of the first things that startups need in this economy would be financing, which is difficult to get. The second thing we need is land, a place to operate, a place to put your factory, a place to house your machinery. ETEC was supposed to be this, to aid in this. However, ETEC has been allowed to, I would say, almost run to the ground in the last 10 years. There are significant issues with ETEC that the current new board is valiantly trying to fix. One of those things, believe it or not, is millions of dollars that in rent that are owed. One of those things would be the fact that ETEC was really primarily for manufacturing, food processing, that sort of thing, and it ended up being also for warehousing. It also has to do with the crime situation where certain ETEC parks where nobody really wanted to go because they were very close hotspot areas. ETEC itself, the park itself, some of the parks themselves, certainly not Frederick Settlement, but many of the others, have not been maintained. And they're in a state of dilapidation. Some of the shells that are left in a state of dilapidation as well too. Some of the shells, even though people were still leasing it and not paying, they let the shells run down to a terrible state. So while they're fixing that, it means that people who are looking to diversify, people who are looking to say, well, listen, I want to get into some area of manufacturing, food processing, just processing, even re-export, whatever it is, need to find a base of operations. But our Trinidad and Tobago property bubble is preventing that. And the reason is, I myself have been looking at warehouses, and there are considerable amount of warehouses out there in Trinidad. Empty warehouses, believe it or not, which is also a sign of the economy, and large warehouses. One of the issues with these is that the people are calling prices upward of $30,000 to $50,000 VAT exclusive, right? Not inclusive of that. In addition to that, many of these don't really facilitate the electrical infrastructure. There are 220 plugs, there are 330 plugs. When you talk to the landlords don't want kiosks and that sort of thing in, because they feel that when you put an electrical kiosk for 330 volts or three-phase, you have to pay something like $10,000 maybe. And they feel that if the tenant was to leave, they'd be stuck with the bill. There's also the strange fact that many of the people who have warehouses and they have it on the market and it's not being rented, it's been there for almost 3 years, and they haven't dropped their prices either. So what that means is that there's a great need for affordable commercial, commercial properties. I do think PSOT, I do think the government is looking at this. This is something that I think is crucial because it's one of the bottlenecks that we need to widen for there to be more entries into the manufacturing sector. As it is now, most startups will not be able to afford $30,000 a month plus VAT for their manufacturing sector, on top of all the other costs, or even more than that, as the case may be. What we really would like to see as policy would be a structured kind of lease arrangement whereby people who get into ETEC or people who get into, let's say, commercial property for the purposes of light manufacturing, processing, that sort of thing, would start off at a very low rent, which would be reviewed or which would scale upwards every 2 years. So in other words, you have 3 years, if anything, to really get your business up and running, get your clientele, market yourself, which is a long, it's a 3 years is a long time, before your rent starts to raise and that sort of thing, right? Or your leases start to raise. So that's a real, what I would say, that's a real concession, a productive concession. Often we hear about tax breaks and tax incentives, but the problem with tax breaks and tax incentives for a startup is that it has no immediate benefit because the startup hasn't started to make money yet. Tax benefits and tax breaks only take effect at the point at which a company starts to make profits and so on. And at that point in time, they can say, okay, you know what? I can access this. If you're still at the point where you have a desire to do this, you have a will to do it, you really want to, you've fleshed out your business plan, you're ready to go, the tax concessions aren't really going to help you. And that is why we need to have an understanding of what the granular path to diversification means. Because the granular path to diversification is physically how you get from point A to point B, where point B is, I have my factory, I'm going to plug in my machines, and I'm going to start work. And the path from point A to point B has some barriers on it, right? One of the significant barriers is that the banks. Now, the banks, curiously enough, are sending out mixed signals. To me, this is my analysis of it. They're sending out mixed signals, and the mixed signals they're sending out seems to suggest that, do they believe that we're really going to have a growth phase in 2028 or late 2027? If we are going to have a growth phase at that point in time, then why are they still maintaining very high risk profile? Why is it that the people who are going to them for financing, particularly with new financing for projects and so on, aren't getting through with it? Or it's a very tedious process. And the collateral requirements are very, very high. So that is another, that's another impediment to I would say, to diversifying. The risk profiles of the banks as well too seem to have changed. A lot of SMEs across the country are finding, and I have found this out personally by talking to many, many people personally. People's financial information, people's financial stresses on things they always talk about publicly. But privately, many people have shared things, and I've seen a great commonality in the things that they're saying, which leads me to believe that it's a kind of a policy level decision, as it were, with the banks. People are finding it very difficult to renew their facilities. The renewals of overdraft facilities, for example, and overdraft extensions are taking very, very long time, months. And it is months that people are waiting. And if your cash flows are slow and your sales are slow in a sense, then obviously you need your overdraft to be able to operate and handle the expenses as well too. The banks are also asking for even more information this time around. They want up-to-date inventories. They even want, normally they ask for last year's management reports. They want first quarter current. They want current outstandings, current receivables. The list has grown even longer. And while all this is happening, SMEs seem to be trapped in, this position where between now and when the expected growth is going to happen, they're wondering, well, how are we going to make it through to that point in time? Now, the governments don't control the banks. The banks are, an entity all on its own. So it's curious to me why the banks don't see it as a positive thing. That all these people with which we have, liabilities with, it is best for us to support their business because, according to the IMF, according to data, and expectations that the economy is going to start to grow, maybe in a year and a half time or so. But that's not happening. As a matter of fact, it's easier to get $1 million to buy a car than it is to get $1 million to start a business. And that's just the truth. So the banks to us are one of the bottlenecks to diversification, and one of the bottlenecks in the economy right now for SMEs to continue, to continue as a going concern, doing business and so on and that sort of thing. It was refreshing to see Larry Hawaii after the Confederation and many other business chambers had responded to the banks when they had decided to raise rates, particularly rates on cashless transactions, which we saw as very, very dangerous. Not only dangerous to us, but dangerous to the consumers, right? The people. In a sense, it's almost a hidden inflation trigger, because when you purchase a good, you're not taking into account the transactional cost of what that adds to your purchasing of the good if you use your credit card or your debit card. And if this would have happened and was allowed to happen at that time, then what would stop it from continuing to happen? Particularly when we are in this mode where everybody feels a movement towards a cashless society is a better thing. I think that shows that you really have to look long and hard at who has the power in a cashless society. It is told to us that the consumers have the power in a cashless society, that they will be safer, that they won't have to work with cash, that they will be able to do transactions at their fingertips, on their phones, and so on. But behind the scenes, who really controls all these transactions? And two, who controls the costs of these transactions? And that is, a particular concern. So when we saw the central bank governor kind of step in and the bank withdrew the idea of increasing the fees, that was a good thing and a step in the right direction. Shows that the government was listening, and it shows that the government took the safety of the people in a sense seriously when it came to things that could really affect them in a very quiet, hidden kind of way. So those were some of the issues that SMEs continue to face, not only in running business, as it were, from day to day, but also, in the process of wanting to diversify. Now, some good things are happening, as Leisha pointed out, which is the government is really looking at trying to find alternative sources for financing. So World Bank, IDB, DFL, many other people have been coming down and trying to work, trying to find alternative ways in which to finance projects and so on moving forward. And I think that that's a step in the right direction. But banks still remain the number one source of finance in Trinidad and Tobago. And I do believe, and I have to say that we had a meeting with BAT not too long ago, I think about 2 weeks ago when I came back. And one of the things I raised with BAT, which is the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, is now BAT is not the Banking Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I really have to say is not. They don't control the banks. They're more. I wouldn't even say they regulate the banks. They're more of a kind of lobbying kind of body in a sense, advisory perhaps. But the question I pose to them is one I would pose to the banks, which is, where do you see yourself, or where do you see yourself positioning yourself in the recovery of Trinidad and Tobago? Do you think you have a role? Do the banks think they have a role in the recovery? And if they feel that they have a role in the recovery, then what that role should be? Should that role be, well, we're going to increase risk, we're going to increase our collateral requirements, we are going to, we're going to be even more critical of a lot of the business plans coming our way. I don't think that that's the mindset we should have when, you know, in the short term, we're staying at economic growth that's going to start to happen in our economy again. So government talking to the banks, business chambers continuing to lobby with the banks has to be one of the more important things that we do going forward, in addition to looking for alternative sources of financing. Because on the one side, whereas the banks would very easily and very readily fund people who have secured loans or the ability for secured loans because they have huge deposits, or people who have large unencumbered assets. It's very easy for them. Given the experience of the SMEs over the last 10 years, they're in a very difficult place. And I really, I understand how many things that the government has to really focus on. The government is focusing, as we can see, on crime prevention. The government is focusing entirely upon the rebuilding of the energy sector and building international relationships with regard to that, which they see as very important. Building relationships with multinational countries, which they also see as important, as well as working inside Trinidad and Tobago to, as we can see with NGC and so on, to see what they can do to optimize and increase the efficiency and profits from our local state companies in the energy sector. So while that is happening as well too, the fact is that I feel the SMEs need to be protected in a sense. I feel that whatever policies that are made, it should be made from the viewpoint that is going to trickle down all the way to rebuild the SME sector that was so severely hit over the last 10 years. And for that to happen, A, diversification has to be part of it. B, financing has to be part of it. And I do hope that when the government then, when government revenues begin to increase, that they do what they did in that 2010, 2015 administration, which is rebuild access to grants and so on, to assist in this. And to also put bodies in place as well to assist people in, pushing projects and that sort of thing. And to some extent, that does exist because we have Invest TT, we have Export TT, we have bodies like that that are currently working with people. But until that manufacturing sector, that food processing sector, even that agricultural sector, gets a lot more new people coming into it, I don't feel that we're going to see the change that we need to see. And if these are the sectors that we really want to see growth in the non-energy sector, then the only way we're going to see growth in it is if new people and there are new entrants into the sector. One of the things I have to point out is people say that very large companies have a lot of money. Why don't they invest in it? And the answer to that question is very simple. If you have a business that is making supernormal profits at this time, if you have a business that operates effectively as a monopoly, and you have a captive market, as it were, if you have a business that is very successful at what it's doing, and that success you can measure in terms of money earned, then for that business to decide to do something completely outside of its sphere of operations is too much of a risk. Why is it going to do that when it's already making so much money doing what it is doing? The smart business decision for them would be to expand what they're doing, try to capture more markets in what they're doing. Or if they have to diversify along the lines of whatever business they're currently in. And that's why you're not going to see very, very large companies or very large successful companies taking the risk to diversify into something completely different, such as light manufacturing, food processing, or whatever. Particularly when we see that the distribution sector in Trinidad and Tobago, which is highly import dependent, which is highly US dollar um, based in terms of the demand for US dollars, continuing to operate strongly, continuing to make, I would say, large profits as well too. The idea that there's going to be a sea change immediately, and that we're going to be able to cut food import bills and cut import bills, and there's going to be, that change from foreign consumption to local consumption is not going to happen unless we have smaller people who are willing to take the risk and have the fire and the drive to create a startup and go out there and start to do the things that nobody else wants to do, but that we needs to be done, however small that may be. And by that I mean pick something. Pick a plastic bucket, and there's some people who are doing that already. Pick some item that you will see when you're walking down in a hardware, when you're going somewhere, and look at it and say, you know what? What's the possibility that I could make something like that? And I've traveled to China. I spoke to Donnie earlier when I was going to the Canton Fair earlier this year. I went to the Canton Fair. I went primarily to the retail part, not the machinery part, but I did visit a lot of the machines parts in China. And what is shocking to me is how affordable the cost of light machinery is. How shockingly affordable, it is to have small machines to do certain things. Yes, they're very expensive machines. It depends on the scale, it depends on what you want to do, but you'll be very surprised at what you can do, and what you can afford with regard to some of the machines out there. All you have to do is start searching it up on Alibaba and YouTube and thing, and you'll be quite surprised at what can be done. And you see, I went to Vietnam for the first time. I took a risk, believe it or not. I saw a sourcing agent on YouTube or something contacted a couple. Many of them turned out to be scams, but one did not. And we worked it out, and I ended up going to Vietnam for the first time. So I visited many garment factories in Vietnam. And what shocked me is that Vietnam is still at a very early stage of its development. It's still very rural. It doesn't look anything like, I suppose, China looks now and that sort of thing. But 2 hours away from Ho Chi Minh City, I went to the Mekong Delta. And the Mekong Delta is basically, looks like, central, where they have all these cane fields and all sorts of things. Well, it's not cane fields there, but they're talking about wide expanse of agricultural land, open land, unused land. And of course, the Mekong Delta itself, right? This huge big river. And there's a cluster of garment factories there, very small garment factories. So when you go in there, you're seeing maybe 10, 15 people, if so much, sometimes 9 people. You're seeing factory the size of what it would look like under somebody's house. I would say totally under 2,000 square feet, maybe even under 1,500 square feet. I would say in a 30 by 30 place, 30 feet by 30 feet. And they are sewing. So one of the places I went to, they were sewing World Cup aprons for Home Depot employees.
Wow.
And how it works is that you have a big exporter or a company that gets the contract from Home Depot, and then they give the contract to 5 or 6 or 10 of the smaller factories, and the smaller factories sew the stuff for them. I also visited a factory that does aloe, and they're sewing this in a really small factory as well too. And this is aloe, the sport and yoga wear. I also visited a factory that does there's this online clothing store in America. I forget the name. I also saw that they were sewing for them as well too. And I was quite surprised. So I didn't go into places that were super high tech sewing factories. These were very basic sewing factories, manual labor, like I said, simple people from the communities, as it were, sewing in there. And when I saw that, I said, you know what, that's what the vision for Trinidad could be, and it should be. It should be about taking manufacturing or taking it into the rural areas where people don't have to pay $50 to come out on a daily basis to find a job in Port of Spain or San Fernando or Rima or wherever it is. An hour or two to travel to get to work and an hour or two back. Um, you know, factories that could be set up in rural areas where you could soak up a lot of the employment. A lot of the places I went to, most of the garment factories are majority women, older women, younger women. Um, and so you're able to increase employment. You're able to use unskilled labor and sort of put them in a skilled position where they could learn something and operate a machine. And you're also able to act as a cluster to create the volumes that you need to get some big contracts. But in addition to that, I've always said that a country that could feed itself and clothe itself is a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
Um,
if I may, just doing a little time check here. It is 8:52. Now I
okay.
want to invite the members who have joined us here on Zoom. If you all have any questions you'd like to ask, if you want to make a contribution, we usually wrap up somewhere around 9:30, so there is time. But around now, we'll start to take questions and contributions. Now, there is one comment from Alan on social media. He says, really good information and discussion. And I can only agree whenever Vivek is with us. You know, it's always a very good program. We get good information. I certainly love Vivek's passion and his vision for the economy and business. That is exactly what we need to really take this country forward. Now, Vivek, you've touched on a lot of things. You've touched, you gave us some feedback on SMEs, diversification, banking, finance, and so on. Now, I want to ask some very pointed questions, though, and I also, as I said before, want to invite the members of the audience to ask any questions. The finance minister was online with us on Facebook. So, Minister Tanku, if you're still there, thank you for joining the program. You know, we always appreciate your feedback and your support and so on. Right? Now, let me start with my question on SMEs. There's been a concern, there has long been a concern, I should say, that the rich is getting richer. In fact, our former Prime Minister said that he had no problem with the rich getting richer. But while the rich was getting richer, small businesses were struggling to compete. And I think that's a very, very fair statement. So, Vivek, I'd like to ask you, under the current government, right, have we seen this dynamic changed and SMEs are getting the kind of support they really need to grow and thrive?
The kind of support that SMEs need, as I said, are the critical areas with regard to Forex, critical areas as regards to financing. And some of these things the government does not have direct control of. So, for example, when I spoke about the role of the banks and really trying to understand how the banks see their role in this economy moving forward, what I see them doing, like I said, I feel like I have a very accurate picture because I have enough testimony from people, is they seem to be making it difficult to do business and they seem to be putting a lot of pressure on the SMEs. If
Okay.
at the end of the day, your risk tolerance for SMEs has increased, and that means that if they're finding it difficult to renew overdraft facilities, overdraft extensions, and so on, then obviously that's going to put a lot of pressure on them at a time when, commercial activity is still muted. So that's one thing. The government has, to their credit, decided that they're going to look at alternative means of financing. But because the retail sector is, I would say, muted at the moment because of, the Forex situation. That's why I'm saying that the best option to start to move towards is some form of diversification away from that. Some form of diversification, which means that if you get into light manufacturing, if you get into processing, there are other avenues by which you can earn income. So, for example, let's look at the agricultural sector. When I go into the grocery now, I tend to look at what local things we produce, right? And I'm very happy to say that when I walk into the green area, the green part of the supermarket, I see that, you know, I feel like all our seasoning needs, and in Trinidad, we like flavor, right? So we have all kind of seasoning when it comes to all the different types of bush or plants or whatever we use to season our food. It's all taken care of, right? When I go into the supermarket, I see all the peppers from a side, and now it's different peppers. I've seen um like this Indian chili peppers, I've seen the Scotch bonnet, I've seen scorpion, I've seen cherry. It's all taken care of, right? I've seen a lot of people, local people producing lettuce, cabbage, and it's all very nicely packaged. Salad greens, all very, very nicely packaged. There's this guy who's doing mushrooms. Um, I see them there too, right? And then a lot of local produce bananas, grown vegetables, all this kind of thing, cassava, Edos, whatever. And that's a good thing because it shows that on one very small level, there's so much that we are able to feed ourselves without having to bring it in.
Yeah.
Tomatoes are one of those things, right? I used to see a lot of imported tomatoes coming on. I still think that there's some out there, but so when I go in there, I see that you're able to go in the supermarket, you're able to buy food to feed yourself, to cook yourself, and to feed yourself, and it's all locally made, right? That's a step in the right direction. So that's a good thing. But then I also saw that grow. That happened really quickly in a sense, right? I mean, Donnie might differ because he knows more about it. But the appearance of these things in the supermarket to me, the way they were packaged and all that happened fairly quickly now. But what it shows is that there's still opportunities by doing local things, right? And serving the local market. And that is why being able to get into one small element of light manufacturing, where you bring in a very small machine that can do a certain thing, you find a hardware, you find people that will buy it from you because everybody's facing the forex shortage. Huh? It's not just SMEs. I think consumers are feeling it as well too. I think across the board it's happening, and therefore it provides an opportunity. And that opportunity is if you can produce it here and you can produce it at a good price, then you will be able to sell it, right? And that's really what I hope, and what we try to lobby for the Confederation. We also work with PSOT. We're trying to lobby with them and work with them towards that as well to try and get more and more people into the manufacturing sector. But to go back to what you were saying, I do feel, what's the sad thing? The sad thing is I feel that the previous admin had built a structure in which we were not included. And that was very dangerous because I kept hearing things coming out from there, which made me feel we didn't have a future. And that's why I said so many people wanted a change in the government. And they wanted a change in the government because they were afraid of the direction that we were heading in with regard to the previous government. I think at one point in time, we had zero communication with anybody in the government. Coming down to the end, there were one or two meetings, but everywhere that we did end up having a meeting, we hit a hard wall. No to this, no to that. No, you can't get that.
When you say
You don't have
we,
to decide.
when you say we, you're talking about
I
the
mean, SMEs. Yeah, talking about SMEs. You see, I come from the bosom of an SME family,
yes.
from Chaguanas, right? From Felicity. And me being in a position, I've traveled all over the country to go to what this chamber having and that chamber having. And what I see is the same thing everywhere, right, Leisha? It is families, it is people, it is not even two generations. Sometimes it is people who in one generation, the mother, the father, the kids get together and say, we're opening a business together. And it's happening right here and right now for the last 10 years, you know what I mean? And they're trying to make it work for themselves too. And I can't imagine a Trinidad and Tobago right? I can't imagine Trinidad and Tobago where I driving down South and Central and all the way there. I driving down all the way up to Napuna into Arima and Sandy Grande and seeing just empty places and empty shops and nothing there. I really can't see that. You understand? But the fact is that there are people there selling everything. If you want to get clothes, you will get clothes, you will get shoes, you will get everything you want. So everybody trying to make an honest living selling stuff, right? And then they have more sophisticated people that have a little more bigger business, and then it scales up and that sort of thing. But the reality is that we really what we felt this government would give, and it was in their manifesto. And what we really want, and I really want to see, is I want to see an economy um, that everybody has a place. It can't be that the idea that the big businesses alone are going to save us. I don't know how the big businesses alone going to save us. The big businesses alone can't hire everybody, right? The big businesses alone, the more automated they become, the less people they're going to hire, right? When I look at the amount of young people who leaving schools, so for example, in my own little business, right? I have started to hire UE, people in UE and UE graduates and things who between jobs, or people in UE who say, listen, I just need to fund myself because my parents have it kind of hard, so I need a summer job. So for the first time, I started getting people who study in law and people who in Mount Hope, students at Mount Hope, coming in um, along the East West Corridor, coming into our branches, looking for work and working very well, collecting their money and looking after themselves. Do you understand? And to me, when I look at that, right, I say, look at the benefit of the SMEs. That even though it's short-term employment and temporary employment, for these kids to say, get a job in the bank at short notice, get a job in a conglomerate at short notice for 2 months or 3 months, to make some money to go back out to school and look after their course, which is what they say they're doing it for. They wouldn't be able to do it, Disha. You understand? They wouldn't be able to do it. So um, our vision is one in which everybody has a place in the economy, um, and that the economy is not really, it's not there to support just one sector or big business alone or whatever. I do believe, and what I like about what the government is doing is they are dismantling, in a sense, a lot of the barriers that have been put up that can encourage monopolies and oligarchic kind of behavior. And the reason for that is, people say that there's always the excuse when you see things expensive in Trinidad, something like medicine, for example, that, oh, it's not our fault, it's the big corporations who putting up the price and that sort of thing. When I traveled to the Far East again, I was in Thailand for a brief amount of time, and I went into a Boots chemist store, which is not even a Thailand drugstore, it's an is a British franchise in America. And I'd run out of Nexium because I was getting acid reflux, and I went in there to buy Nexium. And when I buy the box of Nexium, I shocked at the price of Nexium. Because in Trinidad, I kept getting told, well, the price going up every year, and it's not our fault, and it's not this, and it's not that. And yet I go there, and the price is, the price so cheap. I can't, and it's not no generic thing, it's the real thing. So the good thing about competition is that competition increases price competition. And price competition is always the best thing for the consumer in the economy, right? And if we don't have enough people to grow from what they were to get, because that was always the dream. The dream was, you start small, you start in a little shop somewhere, and then from decade to decade, you keep growing, and from generation to generation, you keep growing, and they have hundreds of people who live that kind of life, right? Why is it that all of a sudden, during the last 10 years, that stopped for so many people? All of a sudden, no growth, nothing happening. You understand what I mean? Just debt and pressure and stress, and you don't know what the future holds for you because you're not seeing a clear path. And so a lot of the changes that the government is making and working on now, right? I think I can say from my perspective, um, working in part with the government, the Ministry of Trade, even working in part sometimes with the current Minister of Finance when we have a meeting with him and when we see him out, even working with other groups from the ministries, we're seeing them bent on working and trying to make a change. But that's happening silently, and it's not something that a lot of people know that is happening. But, there's a system in place, Lisha, and the system in place is not always an easy system to deal with. So a government comes in, for example, for 10 years, we couldn't get sail clear. My friend Jesse James, who's also part of the Confederation and the head of the Yachting Association, yachting is so important to us as a low-hanging fruit for tourism, right? When you go in, and he was the one who told me, because I didn't know this. He said, look, you know what, Vivek? So many of the people and families in Chagaramas are SMEs. And when went there and I spoke to him and he showed me a couple of things, I realized like all these guys that fixing this little thing in this yacht and this little engine and coming and dealing with this little crack and this little issue that the boats have, they're all small and medium business people. Sometimes it's just one guy who's doing it, but that has become their life, right? That's become their business. These people that are coming in here from, Europe and America and wherever, older people, right? Majority older people, mature people. I would say 55 and beyond. They're spending the US dollars, They're coming in here, they have the US dollars, they're spending, they're working with the people, they're patronizing the small businesses in Chagaramas. So it's a good thing. But we get the sail clear system. Everybody's supporting the sail clear system. I get a call from Jesse 2 weeks ago. He's upset, right? Because the custom officer who is in the booth at the sail clear system taking 3 and 4 hours to process a batch of people. They have 6 people in the line in the blazing hot sun, nobody allowed to come inside. The yacht is getting frustrated. So the government has done what they did and what the previous government couldn't do. They have made this system happen in shortest period of time. We now have a immigration portal on your phone, basically, to fill out your form and all that kind of thing. But the hard stop becomes when you have to deal with a real person, right? And these are the little things that causes issues in our country, right? The government can try as hard as they want, but the fact of the matter is that we as a people need to understand what we really want. If we want a better economy, right, then we need to be welcoming. If we want a better economy, then we need to be efficient at what we do, however big it is or however small it is, even if it comes to stamping a piece of paper to let somebody in a sailboat into the country, right? And that is what, and everybody has a responsibility to do that. Even people who are not in business, who are on the street and dealing with tourists or whatever, we all have a responsibility to say that if we want a better country, what are we going to do in our own small way, right, to help that happen? We can't be sitting down on our couches, right, when everybody is working hard, trying to make a change, trying to change policy, trying to get things done, and you just saying, I don't care. I ain't going out with my best today. I don't want to deal with these people. I'm going to make people life hard today. It didn't make no sense. And so the sea change that we're looking for, it isn't always in the government. It isn't always in policy. It isn't even in the US dollar. It comes down to you and myself and the individual out there and the interaction that we have with other people in the jobs that we do, whether it's big or small jobs. If we want a bigger Trinidad, a better Trinidad and Tobago, how to start with we? How to start with us? And how we communicate with each other, and how we communicate with the people that we want to be shareholders or stakeholders in what we are doing. And when you're talking about tourism, then that is so much more important. That becomes so much more important, that point of contact. You understand? Between whoever you are, who as a Trinidadian or Tobagonian, and this foreigner who has come to Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the only way we're going to build tourism here. And tourism is on a very small level. I go to Pigeon Point. I go to Pigeon Point at a time when they have all the cruise ships coming in. And I see all the cruise ship passengers paying US dollars at the bars in Pigeon Point. And I'm happy to see that, man. You know why? Because that money circulating, that money going all over the place. These people getting US dollars in their hand, which in Trinidad and Tobago now is a valuable resource. And it's happening to them, you understand? And that's the beauty of tourism. The beauty of tourism is the taxi driver going to get US dollars. When I had to go to the bank and buy my US dollars, taxi driver getting handed a US dollar, whether it's a $20 or $5. The man in the bar in Pigeon Point getting handed the price of the drink, and before the customer leave, they might give him a tip of $3 or $5. The people in Chagaramas who fixing the boats and running errands for the people and doing things, they get the US dollars and all too. You understand what I mean? And so the US dollar, which we complaining about that we don't have enough of, and we're waiting for the energy sector to build back up and get, the fact of the matter is that we can get it, you know. But what are we prepared to do to get it? Because tourism is entirely a service industry. And if we want more people to come here, right, it really has to start with how we engage these people.
I agree. I agree with you 100%. I am seeing a comment on social media that the SMEs need a Shark Tank crew. What do you think about that?
I don't understand.
Shark Tank.
Or Shark Tank crew. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, the angel investor thing is a good idea. I mean, the fact that you could pitch an idea and then you have people come in and whatever. But you see, our culture here is a different culture too. Huh? When people decide to go into business, they go into business for family. And when I say for family, they go into business because they have a wife, they have kids, and they're going into business to provide for them and to take them to a better life, as it were, right? To increase the standard of living. The problem when other investors come in is that we often feel as though we don't own this thing or that we are at risk of it being taken away from us. And that perhaps is something that we need to revisit in a sense. Revisit the idea that there is a different level of business where you can have a business, you could operate a business, but you're obtaining capital or money from someone else who is a partner in the business. And yet you work out a very formal, legalized document that dictates, the best for both the investor and yourself in running your business. And at the end of the day, most of the time, if the investor feels he makes his money, recoups his money, and gets a profit and thing, he might say, listen, buy me out and I move on to the next person. You understand? So that is one of the ways I feel that a Shark Tank type environment or something like that, the angel investor thing could actually help. Like, for example, the UTT had a Shark Tank the other day. And this Shark Tank was in one of the agricultural, not the agricultural, genetic lecturers had it with the students. And I listening to them and I hear the most amazing ideas getting pitched, boy. I getting ideas about using sargassum seaweed to grow blackfly larvae, and the blackfly larvae is going to feed the livestock sector, particularly chickens, because if you didn't know, chicken feed is one of the big users of forex in our country. I listened to some of them talking about using other types of materials to develop different type of plastics and fabrics, and really, really good ideas. And yet, who is going to invest in them? It comes down to who has the appetite for risk, right? And the people who are doing the best in the economy right now, and the people who have the most money in the economy right now, are the ones who often do not have the least appetite for risk. Because, as I said, they're doing so well already, they ain't going to get into something that they are unsure about. And therefore, it is us, the SME, us, the small people in a sense, right, who have the passion to grow and the passion to do something new. We are the ones who are willing to take on the risk. But then who's going to share the risk with us? The banks willing to share the risk with us? They say, no, we're not willing to share the risk with you. Is the government willing to share the risk? The government saying, yeah, no problem. We will help you. We will facilitate you. right? But we ourselves, dealing with our own issues at the moment. We have a lot of people to feed, we have a lot of people to see about, and we have to be able to fund ourselves. The government of Trinidad and Tobago need to be able to have money to fund itself, right? So that's
Correct.
what they're dealing with at the moment. So
Good night to
that's
Councillor Brenda. I'm just saying good night to Councillor Brenda John, Councillor for Enterprise South Londonville North, who has joined us on social media. Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming on board. And also, I want to do a little time check. It is 9:16, so we are down to our last 14 minutes. If there's anybody at all who wants to make a contribution, ask a question, now is the time. Donnie, I saw you
Yeah,
yeah, do you want to come in?
right. So Vivek, you spoke about UTT, and it was more on the tech side. I for UTT EKF compound about a couple months ago, I was an examiner for their final projects, and the kind of amazing things I saw inside of there. I saw one student come up with a dashing vodka. Someone else had sorrel infused ice cream cones. You know the waffle cones.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else came up with um, plantain ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. And one of the most impactful projects that I saw was someone was able to use the giant African snail and make it into fish food. And here the nice thing about that, it is higher in protein content, but up to 80% cheaper than the imported fish food. So we have the brain, we have the technology, we have the know-how. And my question to the lecturer was, so what next? Do we have a developmental ecosystem that we could use to really get these things outside there, right? I know that some alcohol-based products use parts of a product. And specifically, I mean, it may not use the entire vegetable or fruit or whatever, right? So, which leads to almost zero wastage of an item. Why don't we leverage on these things? And what I think we need to really look at to support the SME sector amongst the strategic financing and stuff like that is a true developmental ecosystem that could see something, a product come in, especially when it's at the concept stage of having a prototype, and you work with that person and put them through. And I think things like that, because we have to understand that the micro sector has the ability to become small, and then you have the ability to become medium within the SME sector. And we need to look at the agricultural sector in the context that we have MSMEs in the agricultural sector that could now grow and become an entity in the manufacturing sector, right? Thereby contributing, to the wider national scale. And how do we do that? Now, whilst that question is asked, I will also put it in context that it's impossible to put all the answers in place after you've had a significant number of years where things just weren't happening, as you say, Rome wasn't built in a day. But I think when we look at the projections from the Ministry of Trade, where by 2030, the projection is to increase non-energy exports by 5 billion, I would wholeheartedly support Professor Roger Hussein's position, where he indicated that will be basically the savior for the economy. Because when we have SMEs developing to that stage, it's not just about the export, it's about the trickle down process to all the supporting industries that a manufacturer would need. It's the level of support type employment that could be generated as well. It's not just from that manufacturer, right? For instance, in the agricultural sector, if you develop the processors and develop primary production, you are developing everything from agro shops, importers, distributors. You are developing the need for expanded education. You are developing the need for technical expertise. It goes with the entire ecosystem of development. So it can't be seen, or it should not be seen as the development of an entity. It is the entire ecosystem that supports that development that also comes into play. So the $5 billion that is projected for the increase in non-energy exports, that will be a significant game changer to the country. And I think maybe we need to look at it in the context of also pushing agricultural type development and processing.
Donnie, thank you. We had lost Vivek for a minute. I see he's back with us. Vivek, I don't know if you can hear us, see us,
Yes, I'm fine. I just got bumped off and I don't know why, and I'm back on.
Well, given it, I want to invite you to make any closing remarks you may have.
Yeah, my closing remarks is, I remain very confident. I really want the business environment to evolve from what it was to one where everybody has a place. I really would like to see more entrants, more diversification, more people entering into processing and manufacturing and so on. When it comes to the banks in this country, I really hope that the banks look at themselves and figure out what their role is going to be in the development of our country, what their role is going to be in the rebuilding of our economy and the renewal of our economy. And when they figure that out, I would think that the only decision they could make with regard to that is, yes, we want to be part of that. Yes, we want to foster that. But until they make up their minds as to what that is going to be, it's going to create a lot of bottlenecks. It's going to create a lot of bottlenecks. There are a lot of things in the pipeline, as it were. The energy sector is one thing, but with regard to changes in the business environment, with regard to policies coming up, I think there's a lot of thought that has been going into it, and a lot of work behind the scenes that's been happening. And I think everybody understands that it needs to be done as quickly as possible. So with those things in mind, I look forward to, what is going to happen. I working hard, Donnie working hard. I asked Donnie to be on a committee, a SME committee with me under PSOT. I know he's been doing his thing as well too. We will continue to lobby, we will continue to represent, and we'll continue to advise rather than to tear down. Because you see, it is one thing to criticize, right? Constructive criticism is a good thing. It's good to say this ain't working, that ain't working, this bad. But you see, what we need right now is we need solutions and we need advice. If you say this ain't working, then come up and say, well, what's going to make it work better? If you say, well, I don't like this thing, I don't feel this thing will be good to me, then don't think about yourself. Let's think about what is going to be good for me as well as everybody else. What is the things that are going to affect the majority of us, in a positive way? And that is how we rebuild the SME sector, and that's how we rebuild our economy. When the most people get affected in a positive manner, not just the few.
Thank you, Vivek. That's a very positive note to end tonight's discussion on. Now, we didn't talk about PSOT, but I'm hoping maybe at some point in future we could actually have a conversation about PSOT on this series. Donnie, over to you. If you have, I don't know if you want to share.
Yeah, I saw a question. I can't remember who asked the question about agricultural exports through NAMDEFCO. It's my personal position that I think we need to first understand the dynamics in the development, or if we look at produce diversification and the diversification of our end product. I think, and I personally believe, when we look at the food import bill, as I've said in a forum on Friday with the India Business Federation, that we could shave $3 billion off of the food import bill if it's done strategically. Now, I think our focus should really be placed on the reduction of the food import bill, which will reduce our reliance on Forex. So we will have Forex savings. Forex savings, if approached like that, can be more impactful at a quicker rate than if we try to produce something to export. And I'm saying that specifically because whilst we exporting food, we importing food, right? When you look at the contra between that, the true net impact may not be felt. But if we increase primary production to support value addition, that hits everybody's pocket because you have increased employment, increased need for support services and products. And that will also offset probably about $600,000 million US, which should be about $3 billion from the food import bill. And I think we'll have a greater impact if we approach it like that. Once we satisfy our need here and we get to where we need to be with regards to a manageable food import bill, then yes, we can start to push forward or in tandem, but at least let us start to offset that so that we could enjoy a better standard of living immediately. And I think that should be where focus has to be looked at, enjoying or having a better standard of living as it relates to the price of food, quality of food, access to Forex and stuff like that. Closing remarks would be simple. I think we're in a very stable position compared to where we were. All the indicators are showing that we are seeing a turnaround. I've said this numerous times before. Statistically, in the agricultural sector, we are seeing the turnaround with regards to increased production. That has matched the prices where we are seeing price stabilization now. We're not seeing too much of spikes. And I think that gives a good benchmark as to where we could build on. Now we have to approach it from a policy perspective, and I think we're in a good position. I will, as I said in the beginning, I'll rate this as stable, which is very good.
All right, Donnie, I want to thank you for your closing remarks. Now, I am no expert on the economy, so I will have to give way to what the expert says. And the latest IMF report was very encouraging, as I said in my opening remarks. Inflation has returned to low levels. The banking sector is stable. Foreign reserves are healthy. The country's current account remains in surplus. The report projected continued economic growth supported by new energy projects and expanding non-energy sectors. That is what the experts are saying. And I will have to, give way to the experts. I myself am not an economic expert. But tonight's program, ladies and gentlemen, has been developments in business and the economy. And I want to sincerely thank Mr. Vivek Charran, businessman and chairman of the Confederation of Regional Business Chambers. I have to agree with one of our viewers who said really good information and discussion. You can't beat Vivek when it comes to hands-on knowledge and information.
That's true.
His vision and passion for economic development and business, small business in particular. I mean, when we thought we would do this program on the economy and business, I mean, Vivek just came to our mind as the person we wanted to have here tonight. To you, our audience on Zoom and social media, members of the media, thank you so much for tuning in. And be sure to join us again next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. for another episode of One-on-One as we keep the national conversation going. Thank you once more. Keep safe and good night, folks.
Have a good
Good
night,
night,
everyone.
everybody. Take care.